Months after a Chinese research vessel docked at Colombo, Sri Lanka to allegedly carry out marine research, reports have now trickled in of a Chinese vessel making its way to Malé in Maldives. This has become the latest flashpoint in the diplomatic tensions between India and the island nation, whose new president, Muizzu, continues to take decisions that adversely impact India-Maldives relations. Now, Muizzu came to power on a campaign called, quote-unquote, India Out. A day after his swearing in, he asked Indian forces stationed in the Maldives to exit the island nation as soon as possible. Muizzu's first state visit was also to China. From Beijing, Muizzu claimed that Maldives is not in anybody's backyard and it will not be bullied, once again trying to send a message to India, but more importantly, from Chinese soil. Now, Muizzu has given the go-ahead to a so-called Chinese research vessel to be docked in the Maldives. While officially these are not Chinese military ships, India has enough reason to raise concerns, as we did back in October 2023 with Sri Lanka as well. Military ship or not, China docking its ships in Lanka and now in the Maldives gives it access to crucial international shipping routes and positions Chinese vessels close to India's coastline. Meanwhile, Muizzu is now facing the heat in his own nation after the death of a Maldivian teen. The Maldives government is facing a parliamentary inquiry over the delayed medical evacuation of a 13-year-old boy during a medical emergency from an island to the capital, Malé. According to local media reports, the tragedy began unfolding on the 17th of January when 13-year-old Mohammad Jah Khalid suffered a stroke and his family made a request for an aerial transfer to Malé. The family claims that the distress calls were only answered on Thursday morning by the Maldivian authorities. Even though the boy was eventually airlifted to a hospital in Malé, his condition had deteriorated rapidly and he succumbed in the ICU on the 20th of Jan. The family of this 13-year-old boy, Mohammad Jah Khalid, believes that their son died due to a delay in provision of medical services by the Maldivian authorities. The opposition in Maldives has now hit out at the Muizzu government for its inability to give proper transport services to the Khalid family. In fact, Maldivian Minister Mikhail Nassim took to microblogging site X and cited a local media agency's coverage of the unfortunate incident. He also wrote, "People should not have to pay with their lives to satisfy the president's animosity towards India." If you're wondering what role India has to play here, remember how I spoke about Muizzu's first move as president. He asked India to withdraw its troops from the island nation latest by March. India, viewers, has been operating and maintaining radars, helicopters and aircrafts in the Maldives. While Muizzu believes that the presence of the Indian troops is a violation of Maldives' sovereignty, it is far from the truth. Indian forces in the Maldives have actually been working mainly for medical emergencies and evacuations in cases exactly like 13-year-old Mohammad Jah Khalid. The 88 Indian troops in the Maldives have saved 523 Maldivian lives in 500 evacuations over the last 5 years. Today, all Muizzu has done is express his condolences over the death of the boy and ordered a reform of protocols for emergency evacuations. There has been no mention of services by India, no indication that Muizzu will rethink his India out strategy to impress the Chinese dispensation. If Muizzu is on a path of self-destruction and downfall, how much of the Maldives will he destroy with himself? That is the big question that we asked today, and I take this conversation forward. I have with me Commodore Anil Jai Singh, former Navy officer, Major General Dhruv Katoch, Senior Defence Expert, Pathikrit Payne, International Affairs Expert, also with us on the broadcast. Let me begin this conversation, if I can, with Commodore Anil Jai Singh. Commodore Singh, we have seen, sir, in the recent past, in October 2023, when China decided to dock its so-called research vessel in Sri Lanka, Colombo. India had raised similar concerns back then, but eventually the Chinese did manage to make their way through. At least the Sri Lankans made an attempt to say no to the Chinese initially. However, with the Maldives, we see that ever since Muizzu has come to power, it seems as though the only thing on this man's mind is to somehow show to the Chinese his loyalty as fast and as soon as possible. So you come out on a campaign of India out. Your first move is to say that please remove the Indian troops without thinking about the services that are actually provided by the Indian troops to the people of Maldives. You then make your first state visit to China, and from Chinese soil you say, listen, we will not be bullied, we are not in anybody's backyard, and we will not be taking orders from anyone. A clear message once again sent to India. And today he stands at this juncture where his former mentor, Abdul Yamin, who was also a puppet of the Chinese, is forcing him, is telling him that you're not doing enough to get rid of the Indian troops. And on the other hand, just in the last week, a little boy has lost his life, and the family, the media, the opposition in Maldives now all blame it on Muizzu's animosity towards India. How do you read these developments, sir?
Well, firstly, as far as China is concerned, China has made no secret of the fact that it wants to become an Indian Ocean power. It doesn't have the capacity at the moment to position enough ships of its own navy to be able to challenge India's preeminent position in the Indian Ocean. But while it is building its navy at an astonishing pace, and probably in a few years from now will be in a position to deploy enough ships in the Indian Ocean and probably have a permanent presence of a carrier battle group, it is doing a lot on the sides to consolidate its infrastructure and other facilities so that when this fleet becomes available to them, they are not wanting as far as logistic bases go or ports of call go. Now, it's not only about ships, it's about what those ships can do. And that is the reason for the research vessels being there. Research vessels have been coming to the Indian Ocean for some time now. India has raised its objections time and again. One of the ships a few years ago had entered the Indian EEZ and was asked to leave. However, these ships very smartly stay outside in the high seas and carry out all the research activity. Now, research activity is important from two perspectives for China. Firstly, they are able to monitor our missile tests, our telemetry data, etc. But more importantly, they are also carrying out a lot of underwater research. Now, underwater domain awareness is very important for successful submarine operations. Any navy which has a better understanding of the underwater domain in its area of operations will have an advantage over any other navy over there because it will have a better idea of how to deploy its submarines, how to deploy its surface anti-submarine warfare forces, what they think the adversary would do. So China's endeavor right now is to get as much information as it can about the Indian Ocean, about the hydrography in the Indian Ocean. And hydrography is a very tricky thing because it can change day by day, it can change hour by hour. And that is what determines how submarines are to be deployed and positioned and how anti-submarine warfare forces are to be deployed. So that is as far as the research vessels are concerned. Now you mentioned the vessel which came in October 2023 when there was a lot of controversy about whether Sri Lanka should allow it to dock or not. Subsequently, Sri Lanka, I don't know whether it was, they did mention that they told the Chinese that they will not entertain any research vessels for at least 1 year, any Chinese research vessels. Now, if that is true, then obviously China needs some place where its research vessel can come and dock. And what better than the Maldives, even closer to India, even more in India's backwaters. So, obviously, this cozying up to Muizzu and Muizzu cozying up to China is not coming without strings attached as far as China is concerned. China is going to extract its pound of flesh. Now, why President Muizzu has gone so far ahead in courting China so soon after taking over on such a strident India out campaign, well, only he can explain that because I think in the long run, Maldives stands to lose far more than it will gain. Already, Maldives has a debt of 1.3 or 1.4 billion dollars to the Chinese. The whole GDP of Maldives is 4 billion. So already 25% or 30% of its GDP is already owed to China. Whereas the debt to India is only, I think, some 125 million or something, despite India having done so much good work in the Maldives. Now, you mentioned about the troops. Well, firstly, I think the word troops in India's case is a misnomer. Troops gives a connotation that these are fighting forces.
Yes.
We have military personnel. These military personnel are only there to service the aircraft, provide the search and rescue effort, provide casualty evacuation, carry out coastal surveillance for the Maldives. The Maldives has a exclusive economic zone of 90,000 square kilometers. It is impossible for Maldives with its current strength to even remotely be able to surveil this area. And there is enough illicit activity happening in the Indian Ocean for a country to be very careful about its sovereignty issues, particularly in its EEZ. India was doing this for them. We've established coastal radars for their coastal security network. So we've done a lot of work over there. And India out as a campaign may be nice political rhetoric, but if it were to be actually implemented, the Maldivians stand to lose a lot more than they stand to gain. And of course, the first, the unfortunate death of this young boy is an indication. And slowly, I don't think the India out campaign notwithstanding, I don't think this is the popular sentiment in Maldives that they want all Indians out or they don't want to have good relations in India. India is their go-to place for their medical treatments. India is the go-to place for the higher education of their children. India is very important to the economy from a tourist point of view. So there are many benefits. India has done a lot of developmental work. We have the Indira Gandhi Hospital in the Maldives I visited that hospital once. It's doing a great job. We've created schools, we've created infrastructure. Whatever China has created, they're going to charge for it, that friendship bridge, etc., that they've built. China has never done anything out of charity. It's always made sure that it's extracted this pound of flesh. So I think Maldives has to be very careful about where it's going with this. The president has to be very careful as to how far he wants to take this rhetoric of his and how much does he want to be in hock to the Chinese over the next couple of years. Because if this continues for the next 2 or 3 years, Maldives will end up as a vassal state of the Chinese. And, all these concerns that he has about his own sovereignty and Maldives independence and all this talk will all be meaningless if the Chinese are able to get their hooks into Maldives the way the Chinese would like to get the hooks into the Maldives. And Maldives is too small a country to be able to extricate itself from that. And they will finally come to us and ask for support, just as Sri Lanka did when it was in very much the same situation. So I think, all told, Maldives has to be very careful about where it is going with this relationship. China, of course, will try to extract as much as it can out of this.
Yes.
It's China to have a vantage position in the Indian Ocean. So that is where this whole equation is going to be very tricky. And also for India, of course, it's a concern, no doubt about it.
Okay, Major Dhruv Katoch, bringing you into the conversation, sir. On what basis then do you feel that a Muizzu was able to get himself elected to power? Now, this has not been a military coup that has happened in the Maldives. The fact that this man was running a very blatant India out campaign, do you feel that maybe there was then a larger sentiment that he was able to tap into? And what really was the thought process there? Because it makes geographical sense for the Maldives to have better relations with India because you're closer to us. As Commodore Anil Singh also pointed out, that when there is a medical emergency in the Maldives, you're more likely to say come to a Kerala or a Tamil Nadu to get the facilities that you need. If there is a calamity in the Maldives, India is more in a position to help out rather than the Chinese. So on what basis do you feel a decision taken to have this very strong India out campaign, and the fact that this man was on the basis of that campaign actually brought to power?
Thank you. You see, the way I've looked at it is that this undercurrent of sentiment against India, it has been prevailing in Maldives for quite some time. I visited this place 3 times. And of course, I went to one of the resorts. And the 3rd time when I went to one of the resorts. And there was a distinct difference between what happens in Malé, where the majority of the Maldivians live, and when you go to the resort. Because in the resort, you don't have these Maldivian chaps. They are being held by separate economic entities. Now, in Maldives, in Malé, you will find this undercurrent of hostility against India. And to a very large extent, it has been inspired by the Islamic State, by their preachers, to spin this narrative, this anti-India narrative. And the way I've looked at, the way I've analyzed it is that the Islamic State has got its tenterhooks inside Maldives. If you have noticed that even, when this, the number of fighters from Maldives who have gone to the Islamic State to fight for them, as a percentage of their population is the highest in the world. In total numbers, they are small, but as a percentage of the population, it is very high. So to a very large extent, the society stands radicalized. Now, the next question arises, if they are radicalized, why don't they go against the Chinese? You see, China has played its card very smartly. It doesn't play the religion card at all, because China is not a religious state. You will find every single Islamic country, none of them have criticized the Chinese for the atrocities they have committed in
Xinjiang,
Xinjiang
yes.
with the Uyghurs, with the Muslim Uyghurs. Not one. But if any small incident takes place in India, you will find them ganging up together and making a whole range of statements. I think it suits the narrative because India is still seen to be a soft power which will take it lying down. But I think India is changing now. You see, India is not going to take it lying down anymore. That era is over. It is a different India which is coming up now. And I think Maldives will regret what they are doing, because when, as Commodore Anil Jaisingh has very rightly stated, when the Chinese put the pincers on them, India is not going to bail them out. They've made a decision; they are going to stew in it. We, of course, will have our problems because amongst these islands which Maldives has got, I think they are going to let two or three islands go to pay off the Chinese debt. I can't see any other thing what they will do. They are going to lose their sovereignty. And at that point of time, when they lose their sovereignty, I'm afraid it's too late for India to help. So the best chance which Maldives has got is to throw this Muizzu chap out. There needs to be a regime change, and it needs to be done quickly. But that is for the people of Maldives to decide. They've had an election in which the people voted of their own free will, and they voted to out India. Now they have to change the tack. Once the pressure is built on them, India should, it is a two-way traffic. I help you, you help me. But I think the time is gone when India will say, okay, you are strategically important to us, so we'll bend down. You can kick us on our butt, but we'll still help you. I think those days are over. It's a different India. It's a very strong political leadership. And we are not going to bend down to these fellows, to their blackmailing tactics, either to them or the Chinese or anybody else.
Okay.
Back to you.
All right. Pathikrit, bringing you into the conversation here. Let's say that, yes, maybe in the future the Maldives may end up going the Sri Lanka or even to an extent the Nepal way. If that happens, and as Major General Katoch was also pointing out, that we're no longer a nation that will take it lying down, that we will not always step in to bail you out. But to a large extent, we ended up doing that in Sri Lanka. When there was political turmoil, it wasn't China that came in to send out the basic supplies, to send out the food, to send out the ration, to send out the medical aid. It was India. If that situation does arise in the Maldives, I'm sure that India will once again, because it's just in our culture. That is just how we are. We do put humanity first. However, how do we then go forward from here with the Maldives? Because it seems as though a lot of nations in our vicinity are not being able to understand what has happened in various different countries. You would think that after witnessing what has happened, say in a Myanmar, in a Sri Lanka, one would understand that it is not, the Chinese are not your friends. They're not doing, as Commodore Jaisingh also pointed out, they're not doing anything out of charity. They will 100% make sure that they extract at least an island or two out of the Maldives in this entire deal. So why do you think that the message that China is not really your friend is not reaching any of these countries? Because that brings back to my basic premise that ultimately there was a democratic election that took place in the Maldives, and they decided to vote in a man who said that my main aim is India out.
Devika, good evening. See, first of all, I completely respect and agree to what both the veterans stated. I'll just put a few perspective here. Muizzu won the election because of, as General Katoch also mentioned, the level of radicalization and anti-India sentiments that was there, and China capitalized on it. In every country, China actually, cultivates leaders like Muizzu. And I'm sure by now Muizzu is a very rich man. He would have some substantial amount of money in coffers in some offshore banking branch somewhere in Middle East or elsewhere. The issue of Sri Lanka, let me tell you, is a little different. Sri Lanka, yes, it did go towards the Chinese, and one reason for that is because after the civil war ended in Sri Lanka, there were a lot of restrictions on foreign funding by the multilateral institutions that were imposed on Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka, beyond a point, had little option but to take money from China, and then the Chinese actually put them in a debt trap, no doubt. But the Sri Lankans never openly advocated animosity towards India, as
Right.
Muizzu is doing
Yes.
in this case. So Sri Lanka was helped, and that was a great gesture, not just a gesture. It was a showcasing that in your tough times, the Chinese didn't do anything towards the Sri Lankans. They kept on bargaining and for the loan negotiation or debt negotiation, and eventually they didn't get anything. So after that, what has happened? It was only after that India did those help that Sri Lanka actually took a decision that there's, for 1 year, they're putting a prohibition on the Chinese research vessels operating in their exclusive economic zones or being allowed to be docked in the Chinese ports like Hambantota. And at the same time, there are certain sections of the Colombo port you would have major investment by Indian companies like the Adanis. So there is a balancing act that the Sri Lankans are now playing. See, I think India has never said that it's mutually exclusive, that you do not and you cannot have relations with anyone else. Only thing India has said that do not allow your place to be used against my interest. In case of Bangladesh, you see what has happened. Today, the Bangladesh External Affairs Minister a few days back stated, I think his name is A.K. Abdul Momen, he stated that he assured India that Bangladesh would not succumb to China. He assured that.
Yes.
And I think there are reasons we all know. You don't need to discuss why the regime there is very much favorable. They have seen a lot of things. For example, I take this example very often. The Bogibeel Bridge on Brahmaputra River has the same dimensions and length like the bridge on River Padma. I think the name of that bridge is Bangabandhu Bridge. The Bogibeel Bridge, made in India by an Indian company, costed India 5,000 crore. The bridge on River Padma, made in Bangladesh, costed Bangladesh 35,000 crore, made by a Chinese company. So they are moving towards India. That doesn't mean that they will prostrate in front of us. We should not expect that either. In case of Nepal, recently India signed a 10,000 megawatt deal with the Nepalese because the hydro power generation potential of Nepal is immense, but they cannot sell it to the Chinese because you cannot set up a grid across the Himalayas. So the Nepalese also are, because Nepal, if you go to Kathmandu, it's overwhelmed with Chinese products. The Nepalese have been driven out of their own market. So let me tell you, in all these countries, even though they realize how the Chinese free trade agreement, how the Chinese, Belt and Road Initiative, under which they don't get anything, because if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative project, the documents, the entire contract, the OEM has to be a Chinese company. There cannot be any tender. All the semi-finished and finished products will have to come, materials will come from China. Skilled and semi-skilled workers will come from China. Financing has to be done by a Chinese bank. It has to be insured by a Chinese insurance company with an upfront payment, premium payment of 6% by the host country. And if they cannot repay within the defined stipulated period, the whole project ownership goes to the Chinese. So eventually they realize, but by the time they realize, they have nothing, they've lost enough. So you see a lot of turnaround gradually happening from Vietnam to Philippines, okay, from many of the countries in Southeast Asia to many of the countries in South Asia. But, politics sometimes, defies rational. Are we to believe Muizzu doesn't know what he is doing? Yes, he knows. But it is his compulsion, because he perhaps would not have been able to win his election if he had not taken the Chinese money and something else also. And that is why he is himself in a trap, perhaps. So I think the only thing we should do right now is to wait and watch. We should not hurry. And I think I have stated it in the past also, and I completely agree with General Katoch. We do help. We will help. Today's India is that we are not going to bend backward anymore for the sake of your rescue. If you do these things, then you pay. You face the consequences.
We saw that recently as well, Pathikrit, when of course there was a big visit to Lakshadweep, and there was suddenly this whole wave of Indians saying that, okay, no, we're not going to visit the Maldives because your entire economy does depend on tourism, and we present a huge chunk of that economy.
And absolutely, and Devika, one important transformation that has happened today in today's India is, I call it the cultural and national awakening and a renaissance that is happening in this country today. where, if you abuse any government of India and if you abuse its ministers and especially the Prime Minister, probably 2 decades back, the ordinary Indian wouldn't have reacted. There was no social media either. But today, they would react. It doesn't mean that the government, it's very difficult for the government to suddenly completely cut off relation, because eventually this man may lose and the opposition party would come. So you don't want to cut off all kind of diplomatic ties with the Maldivians or anybody else. But, as the saying goes, that you be soft but carry a long stick. So I think many of these countries are getting a message. As a big country, I completely agree. It does not necessarily mean that we have to always accommodate them. But I think India is gradually changing in terms of its foreign policy, that, okay, we are there to help, but not at the cost of my own self-interest and self-respect.
Okay.
Yes, I agree. Just one last point. A Chinese vessel coming is a cause of concern. And, Commodore Singh very rightly explained the whole thing. But at the same time, we are into a major face-off with the Chinese in the Asian theater. Indian Ocean region is that place, no denial. But at the same time, I think the Indians, armed forces have the countermeasures in place. You are also building up your bases in Seychelles and Mauritius. You are getting into the South China Sea. So I'm sure, I have full confidence that even if a research vessel comes here and there, once in a blue moon, it will be very difficult for them to have a complete stranglehold in terms of information and surveillance on India, because India is huge. At the same time, there's a logistical challenge that China would eventually also face, because from South China Sea all the way to here, it's not easy. So that it's not that China has a plethora of resources, it's unlimited resources. China has its own internal challenges as well. So I'm sure, yes, it is a cause of concern, but I think it's not something where we lose our sleep or, for the rest of the time. The only issue is, you have to every day manage these consequences, these challenges.
Right.
I'm sure strategically India has a plan in place. How do you deal with this? The Sri Lankan path, where they said for 1 year they have prohibited, maybe every year they would, announce again. But for them to say that from henceforth, no Chinese ship forever to be allowed, it's difficult. So I think it's an evolving situation. We have to deal with these things probably on a daily basis now.
Okay, I just have a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to just pose my last question to our military experts. Commander Jai Singh, starting with you, and then Major Dhruv Katur. The same question to the two of you, sir. I'd just like to understand, as Pathikrit pointed out, we have to, of course, believe that Muizzu knows what he's doing, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a human being who's probably hungry for power, and he, like Pathikrit said, knows what he's doing, which I feel makes him even more dangerous. When you know that there can be very serious consequences for your own island nation, and you still go ahead and take those decisions, it means that you probably don't have anybody's but your own best interests at heart, and you don't realize that you could take an entire nation and its people down with you. Given that reality, Commander Jai Singh, I just want to understand, what is it? Yes, India must wait and watch, but how is it? Is there any way for us to perhaps be 2 steps ahead as far as this situation is concerned, because it is an evolving situation?
Yes, I personally think we are watching the Maldives very closely. This sort of cozying up to the Chinese is not something that's just happened. It's been happening over a period of time. They had a president earlier who had also cozied up to the Chinese. That came to nothing ultimately. Finally, President Soli came. Maldivians also realized that it's India which helped them. If you would remember, a few years ago, they didn't have drinking water. Drinking water went from India. We sent shiploads of drinking water to the Maldives. That country had no drinking water. Where would China have got drinking water from? As was brought out, China 6,000 miles away. So there is no getting away from the fact for the Maldivian people that all this election stuff, election rhetoric, and this sentiment being what it is, it will be India that will ultimately put their fat out of the fire when they have to. There is no doubt about that. Yes, I think the Foreign Office, Indian Foreign Policy, or Indian External Affairs Ministry has very smartly played this. Despite the social media outrage, which has conveyed the sentiments of the Indian people, the External Affairs Ministry has had a very calibrated approach. They've summoned the High Commissioner, they've had a chat with him, they've conveyed their pleasure in many other ways. That is as far as what we have to actually now guard against from a totally military perspective. I'm talking now from a naval perspective, is that whatever concessions Maldives makes to China, and I'm not surprised that, and I won't be surprised if a couple of islands, China takes over a couple of islands or creates, those artificial islands as it has done in the South China Sea, in the Maldivian sort of archipelago. But we have to be very careful that they are not allowed to militarize those islands, because that is the next step China does. Even when they were doing it in South China Sea, they kept assuring the Americans we are not going to militarize it, and promptly they've made runways and positioned missiles over there. So we have to be very careful with that. But yes, we have to be calibrated in our approach. I think I'm sure our foreign office is on top of the situation. They've been monitoring this very closely. Notwithstanding this sort of this discordance in our relationship, we still have a robust trilateral security discussion at the NSA level with Sri Lanka, Maldives, and India. There's a state of that headquartered in Colombo. So those processes are continuing. It's not that there's been a breakaway. And I'm sure at some point of time we'll come to a comfortable arrangement with the Maldives, where Maldives will understand that, like General Katoch very rightly said, we're not going to give in. We're not going to accept whatever's thrust our way just because we think that we are beholden to the Maldivians because of their location. We will play tough, and we should play tough. But that does not mean that we abandon them or let them feel that they're being abandoned.
Okay, all right. Major General Dhruv Katoch, running out of time, so I have 30 seconds to you on the same thought, sir.
Right. I by and large agree with what Commodore Anil Jayasingh has said. Ultimately, I think what India will have to do now is a carrot and stick policy. We have to lay down our red lines very, very clearly and tell them, you cross those red lines, there will be consequences. And one of our ministers has already made that statement in public. Maldives is an independent country. They made a decision. They will bear the consequences of that. So I think the message has been given. So the carrot and stick policy will be there. And they also must realize that India has changed. It's no longer the soft India of a decade or 2 decades back.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.